All right, everybody. I think we can get started now. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the first forum for this project, which is called Visioning for the Coffin School Reuse. Here's just a brief agenda of our plan for the evening. First, we'll go through some introductions and kind of tell us who's in the room tonight. Then we'll have a presentation for about 20 minutes, going to try to keep it concise to go over the project and also some more specifics about the school building and site. Then we'll get into some visioning activities, which will be polling questions to hear from you about your thoughts about this project. And then we'll have some time for a Q&A and we'll go through next steps. The format for tonight is a webinar. We have about 75 attendees in the room, which is awesome. But in order to sort of manage that, we will be in a webinar, which means that all meeting attendees are muted with the videos off. This meeting is being recorded, just so you are aware. And if you have any questions for the project team, please ask them in the Q&A box. And any questions that are simple, we will try to get to in real time. But things that are more complicated or recurring questions that we're seeing a lot, we will try to hold those for the Q&A portion of the forum, where myself and the team from Marblehead will be able to answer those questions. So here's just a sneak peek of the project team. My name is Emma Battaglia. I'm a senior housing and land use planner with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And leading this project on the town side are Jason Silva, town administrator, and Rebecca Kern-Cutting, the town planner. And joining me tonight are Alex Koppelman and Courtney Lewis from MAPC, and they are helping to assist. So we just want to get a snapshot of who is in the room tonight. This is to make sure that the participants in this public process reflect Marblehead's population as a whole. And it could also tell us if there are any gaps that we should fill with more enhanced engagement throughout this process. All answers are optional, so please only answer if you feel comfortable. So I'm going to turn on the first poll, and this question asks, how would you describe your living situation? So if you want to just take about a minute to answer this, and then we will share the results. All right, maybe take a few more seconds to fill in your answer if you haven't already, and then I will show the results. Okay. Courtney and Alex, can we see these results? Sorry, Courtney, you're muted.
Okay, it looks like 96% of all participants say that they own their home, 3% say they rent, and 1% answered other to this poll question.
Great. All right. So going on to the next question, what kind of housing do you live in? So I'm going to launch that, and please give us your answer. All right, just a few more seconds. Okay. So here are results of this question. The vast majority of people live in a single family home, which is not surprising. That's the dominant housing typology in Marblehead. We have one person in a 2 or 3 family home, a few in a townhouse, and then a few in multifamily buildings or mixed use buildings, with 2 putting other. Our next question asks how old you are. Different housing types are better for different ages, so that's sort of why we want to understand the answers to this question. Right, just take a few more seconds. Okay. So we have a pretty even split of people in the 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65 to 74 age gap, with a few people 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 75 to 84, and 85 plus. This next question asks about how many people live in your household. All right, just a few more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna end this. So most people, by most I mean about a third, have 2 people in their household, followed by single people households and people with 3 people, 4 people, and then 5 people. All right, so then this next question asks how long you have lived in Marblehead, and if you don't live in Marblehead but you work there, there's an option for that, and if you don't meet any of those categories, just put other. All right, just take a few more seconds. All right. So we got a lot of people who've been living in Marblehead for quite some time. About 3/4 of participants have lived in Marblehead for over 20 years. We have a few people who are a bit more new to Marblehead and have been here for 0 to 2 years or 3 to 10 years, a couple people from 11 to 20 years, and we have 2 people who don't live in Marblehead, but they work here. And I might be able to guess who those are. All right. And then this last question just asks about your location more specifically. If you live in Marblehead and you live in the immediate area around the Coffin School, no, but you just live in Marblehead, or no, you don't live in Marblehead at all. All right, just take a few more seconds. I see a question, what constitutes immediate neighborhood? We don't really have a specific definition for that. I'm more curious, like if you consider yourself a part of the neighborhood around it, if you would identify that way. So I'm going to end this, and it looks like just over half of respondents live in the neighborhood. However, they want to classify that as, and a little bit less than half live elsewhere in Marblehead or don't live in Marblehead at all. All right, so that is it for our About You section. Now I'll go into a bit of detail about the project and why we're here tonight. For some background, MAPC, which is where I work, we were hired by the town of Marblehead to help oversee a community process to seek feedback in establishing a vision for the Coffin Site and to position it for residential development. The building became vacant in October 2021 when school operations were shifted to the new Brown School. And the town is interested on building off previous success that they've had redeveloping vacant schools for housing. And most recently that was done at the Jerry School. This project is funded fully through a grant from Mass Housing. Just a bit of background about MAPC. We're the regional planning authority serving the 101 cities and towns in Metro Boston. We're a mission-driven organization with a focus on smart growth, equity, and sustainability. And we also bring with us a regional perspective, for housing for example, it's not an issue that sort of is only within one municipality. It's really a regional issue that we're looking for solutions to. So we kicked off the project a few months ago, mostly doing background research, and have started with the community engagement process, which is where we're at now, focused on the site visioning. We are in the midst of holding focus group meetings with government officials, abutting landowners, and residents who would most benefit from new and diverse housing types. This is our first public forum, and we'll also be producing communications materials to do some myth busting, explain, why new housing is needed in Marblehead, and, providing more information about the site in kind of graphic and engaging ways. Following this visioning process, we will be developing a request for information to send out to developers to understand who is interested in potentially working on this site and to kind of understand what opportunities and barriers they see. We'll also be internally doing a development analysis to gain some more clarity about what is possible and makes the most sense for the site. We will have another phase of community engagement later in the project, which will focus on the different redevelopment scenarios we have come up with and to get feedback on them. And we'll eventually identify, the preferred scenario, which will go in a request for proposal to be sent out to developers to eventually reuse the site. So this project is sort of a direct implementation of the housing production plan. MAPC, the project was managed by Alex Koppelman, who's here in the room with us. He led that effort to create the housing production plan, which was completed in 2020. Just a few takeaways from the HPP. The few rentals that exist are very expensive. At the same time, owner-occupied housing, those costs are out of reach for many people who live in Marblehead currently or who would want to move here. Many households, including over 2/3 of low-income households, and seniors living alone are cost burden, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income on housing expenses. And with these high costs of housing, that means other really important things might have to be forgone, like medical expenses, transportation, clothing, etc. And there's only one deed restricted affordable housing unit in town for every 7 low-income residents in Marblehead. So there's quite a gap that we would like to try to fill potentially through this process. So these are just the goals from the HPP, and the project sort of meets all of them. Creating housing that allows seniors to remain in Marblehead, expanding naturally affordable housing choices for a variety of households, creating deed restricted affordable housing, and also strengthening community relationships to build awareness of housing need. The Coffin School was specifically identified in the housing production plan as a potential development site. with townhouses and cottage style housing identified as the most preferable options by the people who participated in that public process. And as is shown on the screen, one of the priority strategies from that plan was to repurpose underutilized or vacant municipal sites for deed restricted affordable housing and market rate housing serving households at a range of income levels. So now I will get into some more of the background about the Coffin site in particular. So we have done a site assessment, and the site has also been the subject of a capital needs study. So we sort of have a sense of the condition that the building is in and what improvements are needed. So, the property for its age is generally in good condition, and the town has maintained it well, but significant and costly upgrades are needed for its continued use. Building systems are quite antiquated and basically considered unsafe due to their age, and are becoming increasingly harder to maintain. As such, school operations were shifted to the new Brown School because it was essentially more cost effective to build a new school and move students there than to upgrade the existing building. And this is mostly due to the ADA requirements that would be needed to renovate and continue using the building as a school, or really any municipal project. So the site is about 3 acres per the deed. I believe the assessor's records have it at about half that. And this process will probably lead to a survey being done to confirm that exact number. It has 960 feet of linear frontage. The total assessed value of the property in 2021 was about $2.85 million, of which just over $1 million is the land. And the site is within a half mile of MBTA bus routes that lead to the Blue Line. The building itself was originally built in 1948, and the annex was added on in 1962. It is 2 stories and approximately 30,000 square feet. And, as you can see in this picture, the facade and the interior of the building have, some quite nice original details that, have some architectural significance. So here's just a brief snapshot of the findings from the capital needs assessment. And it's important to note that these costs do not include the ADA accessibility upgrades necessary to renovate and repurpose this building, essentially for any public use. Those repairs would be in the millions of dollars, given the age of the building and the fact that there really is no ADA accessibility. We need an elevator, et cetera. And an additional study around accessibility would be needed on top of the capital needs assessment to kind of understand the full scope of that. But other than the ADA accessibility upgrades, about $260,000 in critical repairs have been identified. Most of that cost is associated with replacing windows and doors. There's another $33,000 in non-critical repairs and just under $1 million in 20-year capital needs. But as I mentioned, that does not include the ADA accessibility upgrades. So the 20-year capital needs identified, the big ticket item there is the cost associated with a new boiler, HVAC upgrades, and interior refurbishments. And here you could see, what that boiler looks like. It's original to the building, and we know it's not particularly safe because, some staff actually were impacted by, issues with that boiler. So it's really important. Safety is really paramount here. And so all of this would need to be upgraded for any future reuse of the building. Other large costs include roof replacement and maintenance, asphalt overlay and maintenance on the site on the blacktop, and replacing site amenities like the playground and whatnot. So here's just a few pictures of the building to kind of give you a sense of what it looks like. This is I've learned this is a custom door that was not easy to get. You have this very interesting sort of entryway here. Here's a shot of the outside of that building, kind of from the back. Here is the gymnasium area. That's right where when you enter into the site. Here is that entrance. This is just a picture of one of the classrooms in the original building. That building has 5 classrooms on the first floor and 4 classrooms on the second floor, and they're pretty generously sized. Each is about 1,000 square feet. Here's just some nice little details. This is a stained glass window. Here's a picture of the annex, not quite as ornate as the original building, but this building includes 3 classrooms on the first floor, plus the teacher's kitchen and storage, and then there are 4 classrooms on the second floor. Here's what that playground looks like, and as you can see, there's some kind of ledgy area in the back of the site. And here is the field that I believe one of the Little League teams practices on. All right, well, I got through that presentation pretty fast, so that's good. It will give us plenty of time for our visioning questions. All right, so we're gonna do a couple more polling questions. The first question asks, what kind of housing do you think, what kind of new housing types do you think are most needed in Marblehead? And you can select as many as you want here. So I'm gonna launch this. One question I just want to answer, we'll get to this Q&A later. The purposes of this project is only to look at, the reuse of the site as housing. Whether or not that ends up happening, it remains to be seen, but that is specifically what we have been scoped to do. And, we're not looking at other uses at this time. The town has sort of decided that it wants to look at the possibility of housing here at this time. All right, so if you want to just take another few seconds. All righty. So we see a range of options here that people have identified as their preferred. Most support for choices for residents wanting to downsize, followed by a range of housing types. So, that can include anything from small housing types to multifamily, just having a range of diverse housing types. So it's not, just all single family. More or better home ownership options, more or better rental options, got about 38 votes. We had about 20 votes for mixed use development, 12 votes for housing near amenities, 21 votes for housing near transportation options. Only 4 people put housing near jobs, and 34 people identified smaller housing options as the kind of new housing they think is most needed. All right, this next question specifically asks, what population should new housing serve? And for this one, you could also select as many as you want. All right, I'm going to end the poll. All right, so the most common response I'm seeing here is for seniors, followed by low-income households, moderate income households. Sometimes that's referred to as workforce housing, racial and ethnic minorities, families, people with disabilities, then single people, and then lastly, multi-generational households. And that would include, if you have grandparents living in the house, maybe helping to care for the kids or just living there. And generally, those housing types might need to be bigger to accommodate additional family members. All right, so this question is thinking generally about Marblehead as a whole. So not specifically the Coffin Site, just Marblehead as a whole. What housing typologies do you think are most needed? And so the answers here are small single family starter homes, on smaller lots, not necessarily the bigger homes that are being, produced mostly today. Other options are detached accessory dwelling units. So like a granny flat or an in-law apartment that would be located on the same property as, a single family house or another house. Cottage housing refers to sort of clustered smaller housing types that are generally located around a common green space and have shared parking. Then we have 2 and 3 family homes, townhouses, multifamily buildings, mixed use buildings, and then adaptive reuse of historic buildings. So, using a historic building for another purpose like housing. All right, if you want to take a few more seconds there. Okay. I'm going to end the meeting or end the poll. Sorry, not end the meeting. Okay. All right, so the most common responses we're seeing here are small single-family starter homes and cottage housing and adaptive reuse of historic buildings. Other options that people identified were townhouses, followed by multifamily buildings, 2 and 3 family homes, accessory dwelling units, and then mixed-use buildings. So that would be buildings with commercial, such as retail or a restaurant on the first floor, and then housing above. Okay. So now I just want you to think a bit about, sort of what comes to your mind initially when you think of the Coffin School site. I know some people sort of have envisioned it for some other community purposes. So we just sort of want to get your take on, what you think of initially when you think about the reuse of the site. So if you could put your answers in the chat box, and then we'll just give a minute or so for you to get those in there. And then Courtney and Alex are going to read through, identify, some of the common responses that we're seeing. And also just so you know, if we miss over something or we're not able to, mention all of the things that are in the chat, because we have quite a few people here tonight. After this meeting, we'll be producing a document that has all the results of the polling questions and includes sort of anonymous versions of people's responses to the questions. So that will be available on the town website when we post the recording of this meeting and the presentation. So, anybody who's not here is still able to see how people are responding.
Emma, can you just repeat the question?
Oh, absolutely. When you think about the, sorry, when you think about the future reuse of the Coffin School site, what comes to mind?
So we're getting some really good answers in the chat. Feel free to continue to enter answers. I'm just going to start calling some responses out. We have housing and a community garden, starter housing, starter homes for those who can't afford homes in Marblehead. Someone mentioned an archive site. We have a new library, meeting space, and green space. Again, housing for low income and seniors and those with disabilities. Affordable housing. Definitely affordable housing because of the expense of trying to buy and rent in the town. Green space and community gardens, parks, open space, and a new library. Again, some people have expressed that this would be a great location for a new library facility, as well as housing. We have a comment about universal about the site serving as a facility for universal pre-K. Community gardens, a public park, affordable housing, smaller townhouses, open space and open green space and recreation space. Additional comments about the this being a possible site for a library facility. Someone made a really good suggestion about the site being the building being a multi-purpose site. So having affordable housing, but also some community amenities for educational purposes, possibly an environmental center, artist studios. We have some more suggestions for open space and recreation facilities, a hockey and ice rink. We also have additional comments about affordable housing.
And some people have mentioned this in the chat, and thank you for clarifying that. The site will be used for the library during the interim as they carry out their renovations.
We have additional suggestions for mixed housing coupled with open space. So something that gives somewhat of a village feel. More affordable housing specifically for seniors and low income residents.
I see a question around, can the building be repurposed or will new buildings be guaranteed? That's partly why we are here. We want to get the sense from the community. We have a question coming up about that, but we want to get a sense from the community about priorities for preserving the building. And, ideally through the RFI and RFP process, it will sort of become clear, what a developer can do with the site if they are able to reuse the building, or, if there are constraints there.
Someone suggested deed restricted affordable housing, specifically cottage style housing with open green space. Repurposing the site to meet the demand for pre-K schooling. Additional suggestions for parks. One suggestion specifically mentions a dog park, or a park that's dog friendly.
All right, do you want to just read maybe one or two more, Courtney? And as I mentioned, we will include all of these in a document after the meeting, so you could see, all the different responses that people are putting in.
Sure. I'll read like one or two, but it looks like generally most of the suggestions are falling within a few general suggested uses. One comment says a housing solution for those excluded from Marblehead, housing market, including people of color, Marbleheaders aging in Marblehead, and low-income headers. We have some suggestions about open space, town offices, school offices, or future classrooms, and also senior cottage homes.
Great. And, just to clarify that, even though housing is the focus of this project, that does not mean that is all that has to exist on the site. And ideally, we'll be able to combine, housing with other public uses, like a park and, other public open space that the community can still enjoy. All right. I'm going to go on to the next question now. And this is a polling question, so let me launch that. Okay. So this specifically asks if you think the existing Coffin School building should be preserved. And there's an option for yes, the whole building. So that includes the original building and the annex. Another option, just preserving the original building, but not the annex. And then the last option is, tear it all down and build new construction. All right, I'm going to share the results if you want to get your last answers in there. Okay. So not super surprising. Most people think that the original building should be preserved. Slightly less enthusiasm for the annex, but which got, keeping the whole building got the least number of responses, and new construction only kind of falls closer to, yes, preserve the whole building, but definitely preserving just the original building seems to have the most enthusiasm. Okay, so this question sort of gets at how to balance open space and housing on the site. So we're asking, how should housing and open space be balanced? So one option is to redevelop only the existing building and maintain the site as open space. Another option is to redevelop additional portions of the site, but still keep some public open space. And, we're just throwing in this last option, redevelop the whole site. And all these polling results will be on the town website. We'll probably put it out as a news blast, so it shows up on the homepage, and it'll include the recording of tonight's meeting and the presentation for anybody who can't attend. So just take a couple more seconds to respond, and then I will close the poll. Okay. So about half of participants, their preferred option is to redevelop slightly more of the site beyond just the existing school building, but still maintaining some public open space. And, there's a lot of options of what that could look like depending on, what we hear tonight and how, conversations with developers go, whether it's a playground or a field or, a public walking path that is ADA accessible. There really are, a number of options that we can consider. So about just over a third of people suggest that we should only redevelop the existing building and maintain the rest of the site as open space. And 15% of people think that we should redevelop the whole site. Okay, so this is a similar question to the one we asked before, but specifically getting your input on what housing typologies you think make the most sense for the Coffin School. And if you can select your top 3, that would be great. If you really want to, include other ones, though, that's okay. We're not going to restrict you. And these options, again, are small single-family starter home, detached accessory dwelling units, cottage housing, 2 and 3 family homes, townhouses, multifamily buildings, mixed-use buildings, and adaptive reuse of historic buildings. So that would be, reusing the existing Coffin School. And one other question that we saw that I just wanted to address. The site is not being considered for public housing. That is housing that would be managed by the housing authority. This would be privately owned housing and could be sort of any combination of market rate housing and affordable housing. Ideally, some mixture of both. So, mixed income housing. So just take a little bit more time to answer this question, and then I will share the results. I'm going to close the poll. So the most common response we're seeing are small single-family starter homes, followed by cottage housing, which is tied with adaptive reuse of historic buildings, followed by townhouses, multifamily buildings, mixed-use buildings, and then detached accessory dwelling units. All right, so this is kind of a general question about your priorities for the site. And again, if you could select your top 3, that would be great. The options here being preserving the existing building. And, if you want all of these things, that's totally fine. We just sort of want to understand what people's top priorities are here. Utilizing high quality architectural design for any new buildings, retaining the public open space as it is, providing new public open space amenities such as a walking path, providing considerable landscaping and screening, providing adequate parking and traffic management, and lastly, providing affordable housing units. So a great question, what exactly does affordable housing mean in Marblehead? So affordable housing is defined by HUD, the federal agency, and it's based on the area median income for the Boston region. So, when you actually look at what the definition is, a family of 4 is considered low income if they make about $100,000. So just because the area median income for the Boston area is so high, we have so many high income earners that it really does sort of skew. So even something that's considered affordable or at an affordable rent, that might not even be affordable to the most, the families and individuals that are struggling most. But, it's just sort of a specific term that is regulated by the government, and also any units that would be included on the subsidized housing inventory, those have to meet the definition of low income. And those would be also deed restricted units, meaning that they can never be, they would have to be affordable in perpetuity or for, X number of years, usually at least 30 years, to ensure that, they can't be affected by the market and go up in price considerably. So if you want to just take a couple more seconds and then I can read. Oh no. I think I might have just erased through that. If you can just answer this question one more time, I'd really appreciate that. So just take a few more seconds and then I will go through the results. People are asking if I could post. Am I reposting the poll? Are people not seeing this?
No, the poll hasn't ended, but it is asking the correct question, the question that's currently on the screen.
Okay. I see 62 people have answered it. All right, well, I'm just gonna read through the result. If we have some time at the end, I might just put this question back on, and anyone who didn't get a chance to answer, we can go through that again. Okay. So here are the results of that. So about half the people who responded suggested that their main priority is affordable housing units on the site. That is followed by providing new public open space amenities, which is tied with preserving the building. Following that is utilizing high quality architectural design for new buildings. And then providing adequate parking and traffic management. And lastly, retaining the public open space exactly as it is, with the small playground and the playing fields. All right, so that is the last of the polling questions. Then we just have a few more open response questions. So here, if you could just tell us more about your priorities. A lot of that was sort of covered in the first question about when you think of the site, what comes to mind, but if there's any other priorities that you want us to note here, please leave those answers in the chat and we'll give people a minute or two to get their results in, and then Courtney will help go through that again. Just to answer one question about affordable housing. So affordable housing is for low income households. And low income is, again, considered anyone making less than 80% of the area median income. There are also what we call deeper levels of affordability. So people who make between 50 and 80%, people who make between 50 and 80% are considered low income. People who make between 30 and 50% of area median income are considered very low income. And then people who make less than 30% of the area median income are considered extremely low income. Essentially the deeper levels of affordability you include, that essentially means more subsidy is required, either from the developer or from a public agency to fund those units. So it's essentially more expensive to do deeper levels of affordability because that's less revenue that, would be generated from the sale or the rental of those units. I'll just say that just responding to a question I see in the chat. No decision has been made yet. That's what this public engagement process is for. We are specifically looking at the possibilities around housing for this site, but the feedback that we get is very important. And just around the question of a traffic study, we can't really do that until we have a better idea of what kind of development would be on the site. I would assume that would be involved in any process, before the site went before any of the boards, there would be a traffic study completed. And generally, we think that there will probably be less traffic to the site than in the past as a school, especially you wouldn't have people necessarily coming and going at exactly the same time every day. It would be spread out more throughout the course of the day. So Courtney, do you want to read through some of those responses?
Sure. So we have a lot of comments about community character, maintaining the density and scale and appropriateness of the surrounding neighborhood context. We also have quite a few comments about wanting to ensure that the site has green and open space. We have some comments about making sure that affordable and mixed income housing is provided for low and moderate income households, as well as minorities and people of color. We also have and also ensuring that housing that is built sustainably and incorporates green elements. Also emphasizing that the site should be a multi-use site, so allowing for affordable housing, but also providing some type of community amenity, whether it's an educational use or some type of arts and cultural use. There are some comments about ensuring that whatever is built is sustainable and includes net zero design and is also ADA compliant. Again, emphasizing improving and not diminishing community character. There are a few comments about providing recreational space for youth activities and as well as options for households that are wanting to downsize, but also taking into consideration traffic and traffic generation and access to the site. There's support for ensuring that the existing building is repurposed and used so that it does not adversely affect the environment.
I'm seeing a lot of comments in here about the decision already being made. Like I've mentioned, we are setting this project for housing, but depending on what that means, like that could really mean anything, right? It could mean different typologies, it can mean different density. And, it also doesn't necessarily have to mean that we're not going to be able to have other public amenities. And I'll let the town sort of answer why who we decided, that we're looking at this for housing. But, again, I can't really reiterate enough about the fact that we're in a housing crisis in the region, and that is largely associated with the lack of supply. So if we can provide more affordable housing, that's great, but also even market rate housing does, correlate into that supply and demand equation, and ideally helping to bring down the cost of housing for everybody. And, the site is just being targeted for housing. We're not trying to single out the neighborhood. It's just because this building has been vacant. And, I think the town will probably, describe that this is their ideal for, any vacant properties that are coming on the market. So this just happens to be the first one, but this will not be the only site where, that might happen. All right, Courtney, you want to read maybe one or two, and then we will move on to our next question?
Sure. It looks like there is strong support for mixed income housing, specifically smaller homes or cottages with small yards that are rental or deed restricted, but also providing a community amenity such as a park, a playground, or a recreation space. And again, there are several comments about ensuring that whatever is built, or if the site is improved, and making sure that sustainable elements are incorporated into the design of the space, specifically solar, high efficiency, appliances, and high efficiency appliances. Sorry.
Great. Okay. So I'm already seeing some concerns being mentioned in the chat, but here's your opportunity to just let us know what your concerns are regarding the redevelopment of the site. And, ideally, we want to, be able to figure out ways that we can mitigate those concerns, and sort of what are trade-offs that we can make to come to a conclusion that, really it meets the needs of all people who live here. Yes, the town could definitely impose conditions on the property. Essentially, the RFP will basically lay out the parameters that, are non-negotiable, and then the developers will sort of respond with, here's what they can offer. All right, Courtney, you want to start reading some of these?
Sure. Okay, so there are concerns with about there are specific concerns about re there are general comments about redevelopment of the site being negatively impacting the neighborhood as well as the town. There's also concern about increased traffic and how that would be mitigated. Someone posted that there is low cost housing along a corridor that runs on Green Street, and posing the question or asking if this will development of this site would not further exacerbate that.
And yeah, just a great comment from Alex, who managed the housing production plan. That was a 10-month long planning process with multiple opportunities for public engagement that was guided by a steering committee. And we are essentially working to implement the findings of that plan and the recommendations laid forth in that plan.
There's also a comment about no blasting. I'm not sure, like I can't quite put that into context.
I think there are some rocky portions of the site that may require some site work if that area was to be developed.
It seems that this is more of like a comment versus a concern, and it's just including community gardens and common space that would benefit any new or and current housing in the area being important. And also density. So there's someone has cited a specific example of dense housing on Green Street. So I'm guessing they're saying something of that scale would not necessarily be appropriate for that site. Also, there are concerns about access to transit, so ensuring that
I'm just going to quickly go through some of the things I've seen so we can move on to the next question. You did a great job summarizing that. Also, you know, a number of people have identified their concerns being, you know, the lack of senior housing, the lack of affordable options. So not necessarily concerns about redeveloping the site, but just general concerns about, you know, the state of housing in Marblehead. All right, so any other comments you have, we're not going to go through them now, but please write your answers in the chat box and the project staff will be able to read those later and we can include those in our summary of the meeting. All right, so now it's time for our Q&A. We've already tried to answer some of the questions in progress. Alex has done a great job of responding to some of those in the Q&A. Alex, if you want to just hop on here and let us know, read through some of the questions that you weren't able to answer, and also ones that have come up as sort of common questions that are being asked a number of times. And me and Becky and Jason from the town will be able to respond to those.
Sure, thanks, Emma. So one of the first questions that I think would be worth some more discussion comes from Angela Ellis. She asks, yes, but what is the cost of demolition and rebuilding? It's greener to renovate. Surely for whatever purpose.
So I think right now we don't know what those costs would be for sure. That's something that we're hoping to identify through the RFI process, and through the market and development analysis that we'll be doing internally, just to sort of figure out how the different options line up financially, and what is feasible from a development perspective.
Okay, and then we have a question about a couple folks have asked whether this site was ever considered for the library. A few folks have asked that.
Becky and Jason, could you respond to that?
So can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So in the interim, so the library town meeting just passed a large override last year, and the library is being renovated, the present library. And in the meantime, they're going to be located in this building for a temporary library. And that won't, that'll be 18 months or whatever that is while they're renovating. So it's not a permanent housing of the library. It's just temporary. So I think people have heard that, and that is happening, is my understanding.
All right, Alex, you want to?
Okay, and then we have a question from Lori Barman, who asks, will the building be sold to the highest bidder no matter what we say?
So the answer to that is no. The developer that is selected is the one that has the best proposal and most, clearly aligns with the vision that we've set forward for the site. Ideally, if they're also offering the most money, that is a good thing, but that's not all that is definitely not all we are going to be looking at.
Okay, thanks. And then there have been a couple comments about the Eveleth site, some suggestions just to consider that site for affordable housing development, but just wanted to bring that up and give the town an opportunity to respond to that.
Becky and Jason, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure, I will. This is Jason. As properties become available, I think we will look at potential reuse options for them. Eveleth was also included in the housing production plan, so I imagine if and when that property does become available, we will make that assessment at the time. But as of right now, we are in this process for Coffin. So I've noticed, if you wouldn't mind me trying to address one other issue, I see a lot of people in the chat commenting that this was kind of a done deal or a decision that has already been made. And I just want to say we did go through a pretty robust process to create the housing production plan that included a lot of public engagement and community involvement. And even with us going through this process as a result of the recommendations of the housing production plan, this by no means is a done deal. There are many additional steps that this is going to have to go through in order for this planning process to actually be implemented. So, so this is one step in a very, very a multi-phased process in order for this to come to fruition. So it's by no stretch a done deal, or decisions haven't decisions are ongoing with this potential project and process. So and there'll be other opportunities for people to offer more feedback and be engaged.
I see a question around the housing production plan. To be clear, that was a town-wide project. Notification, obviously we can't necessarily send direct mail to everyone. And even if we could, that would only reach people who own their properties, not any renters. So we would be, excluding a large population of people who are not on the abutters list. So various outreach was done through that process. The plan is available on the town website. You could read it at any point. And like I said, it was a townwide process. So there wasn't specific engagement focused on any abutters because it was a townwide plan. We did hold a focus group meeting with just the direct abutters who immediately abut the site, just because, for the purpose of a focus group conversation, we need a slightly limited group just to, be able to have a conversation. But by no means is this the only opportunity. Like, you can respond to, you could, reach out to Becky and Jason at any point with any comments. Please feel free to share information about this. We're certainly not trying to keep anyone in the dark, and we're, doing the best that we can based on this COVID pandemic, and just trying to reach as many people as possible.
And there have been some questions about the engagement during the plan, so I just wanted to offer some details there. There were 2 focus groups held at Abbott Hall in April of 2019. There was a public forum held at the Masonic Temple on June 24th, 2019. And then the forum where different areas of town and possible sites were discussed. That was on October 7th at Abbott Public Library. And at that meeting, there were over 100 participants. And these things can be explored further by reviewing the plan, which I'd really encourage folks to do.
Do you want to just mention how those earlier meetings were publicized, Alex?
Yeah, so these meetings were noticed on the town's website, and outreach was also done through the steering committee of residents and experts that were appointed by the town, who invited several different groups. But this was a town-wide community planning process, so anyone in town could attend. I know there have been some comments in the chat about abutters being notified recently, but that's because this specific process deals with a specific site. So that's why I'm sure you've been contacted more directly at this time, but the housing production plan process was open to the entire
town. Yeah, so there's the housing production plan in place. We are in the process of working on the plan for this project specifically. And if you are an abutter and you haven't been engaged, if you weren't one of the, so we only include people on who, basically physically abut the site, because there's so many people who live, in the general area. So please reach out to Becky or Jason if you have any further comments. And if your neighbors weren't able to attend tonight, they can, provide feedback through that means. We are capturing everything. Do you want to go through some of the questions that came up earlier?
Well, since we've been talking, there has been a couple more questions that have come in. So Lori asks, who determines the criterion and what constitutes the best proposal?
So that is something we will be deciding during this process. So, based on what we heard at tonight's meeting and our conversations with the steering committee and all of our focus groups, we will be identifying, the specific non-negotiable criteria, and that will all be presented at the next meeting. So this meeting is just meant to get your general ideas about the site and lay out a general vision. And then all the possibilities that, we are actively considering will be presented at the next forum and, with the opportunity for feedback.
And Chrissy and Brian O'Neill have asked, based on other developments MAPC has been involved in, what is the typical finished product on a site this size in a residential neighborhood?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer for that because it really varies. So, unfortunately, I'm not sure if I have an answer to that. Can you think of anything, Alex or Courtney?
I think I'll defer to Courtney on that one.
No, I think as you mentioned, it is just going to vary based on the site, and also we also any recommendations that we make for the site are based on input from both the town, the residents of the town, as well as the town's guiding planning document, which is usually the comprehensive master plan.
All right. So I think definitely a mixed bag on the chat here, of what people want to see. And we will try to notify as many people as possible. And anyone who has been included on this meeting will be notified about the next meeting. And if there are other people that you think should get involved, please let them know, and we will capture their feedback. Jason or Becky, were there any other questions that you saw that you would like to answer before we wrap up?
No, but just to tell everyone that if you have specific questions, you can call me or email me or reach out to me. I'm at Mary Alley or Abbott Hall, and my contact is on, actually, I'll put it in the chat. And thank you. I don't remember ever having this many participants at a public workshop, so we somehow got everybody or a lot of people involved, which is great. And just so you know, we use the town's Instagram, Facebook, the website, and we sent a press release to the newspaper and all those sorts of things to try. But if people have other ideas, you also can sign up with MAPC, other ideas of how we can reach other people, we'd be interested in that. And then I think we're going to stay on schedule. We said we'd be done by 8:30, but we need to Emma's going to talk briefly about next steps.
Great. And if there are other questions that we haven't been able to answer, but we would like to answer, we will also include that in the summary of tonight's meeting. Question about the steering committee meetings, Alex, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think there's been a little bit of confusion about the housing production plan in this process. I mean, the housing production plan looked at a ton of different things, as Emma presented at the beginning of this meeting, and established different goals, strategies, and other recommendations. And as a part of that, the state requires that housing production plans identify different sites where housing development would be encouraged. And so the housing production plan merely lists this as one of those sites. It does not make any decisions or specific recommendations for the site, and that's what this planning process is about. So for the folks who think this is a done deal, this is really the town's effort to engage folks specifically around the site. So no decisions in the housing production plan are really affecting that. It's just why the site was considered in the first place. It was a long public process, 10-month process. The steering committee met throughout that process, and when the plan was adopted in May 2020, the steering committee no longer met.
All right, so next steps, basically, we will first be drafting a request for information based on the engagement to determine priorities for the redevelopment and to figure out what developers are interested in this process. So, we'll be sending that out to private developers, but also nonprofit housing developers that, are working kind of in the North Shore area. Then we will review developer submissions and get started on our sort of internal development analysis, which looks at the natural constraints of the site, zoning, the market analysis in terms of what kind of housing is most needed in Marblehead, the finance feasibility around the different development scenarios. And then finally, we'll present at that next meeting the different redevelopment scenarios that we have studied, along with some visualizations, and we will ask for input on that. So we do not have a date for that meeting yet. It will probably be, later, kind of late winter, early spring. And, this is just the beginning of our opportunities for future engagement. We will be having a focus group with residents, and and specifically residents who would most benefit from new and diverse housing types. So that could mean renters, low-income folks, seniors who are looking to downsize, anybody who could really benefit from housing other than, large single-family homes. That is mostly what the market is producing today. And the next public forum will occur between the RFI and RFP processes to decide on, what we want to put in that RFP. And at this link, you could sign up for project updates. So we'll announce the next public meeting there and any other, opportunities. And, through that listserv, we will send out the summary of tonight's meeting and the recording as well. You could email Rebecca Curran-Cutting, the town planner, at rebeccac@marblehead.org with any questions or comments that you have. So I think that is it. We're wrapping up just in time. And thank you all for joining us. Please follow up if you don't have, please follow up if you have any comments. Thank you so much.